There are different types of fear, and fear hides love. There's fear for the body that is controlled through the lower parts of the brain. Like if a lion walked in the room, your body would do things involuntarily. And then there's the fear for the mind, the fear for the conceptual self. That's the kind of fear that's triggered by information. Not just sensory information, but conceptual information. The conceptual self is made of concepts. And those concepts are threatened by other concepts. So as long as there's identification with various positions related to the form, as long as that concern exists for it through identification with it, there's an obscuring of what's perceived. The spectrum, the bandwidth of perception is narrower in the state of being identified with a conceptual person. And that's not to say one doesn't act normally, but it's like being in a play. All the characters are an expression of the first cause in some form or fashion. There's belief in everything so long as there's identification with form. Everything is very serious in that belief. Ideas are very important. Narratives are very important. But there can be a shift in perception due to a change in the inner arrangement. And that change reveals the non-self nature of what appears in awareness by virtue of the self being the awareness in which it all appears. That's discovered in the process of letting go of unwanted thoughts. As the pull of thought diminishes due to the surrendering of their fate over to their creator, because thoughts are also dependently originated from the first cause. They're a product of experience, and that experience is a product of the causal chain, which is a product of the first cause. they're not identified with and they're not necessarily responded to. It's like the chain on the bike of the person is broken, and when the thoughts turn, the back wheel doesn't, because the chain of identification between awareness and that which appears in it is broken. But all the knowledge is retained of how things are when identified with. It's just that the inner reaction to phenomena is tremendously diminished to the point where there's room for the perceiving of subtler energies. And those energies, for lack of a better word, are colored by reaction to circumstance. And when a thought is taken seriously, when it's believed to relate to somebody, and that somebody is a vulnerable self, then there's a reaction, and that colors the energy body. When that relationship appears experientially, it's instructive and really just points out delusions. But it makes for mindfulness due to the consequences of ignorance, of believing that the body is the self, that in body identification. And that's not to say you don't step out of the way of a train. You do all those things and your body reacts the same way, because there's a part of your brain that will do things automatically. But if somebody's hating on your worldview, there's no perception of being some offended party, because such views exist. They're embodied in individuals. And when there's strong identification with them, then there is pain in the face of countervailing ideas. There's just disturbance, just constant disturbance that hides things. And triggers things in the body constantly. Stress hormones can damage the body. What happens when the body is no longer having to repair from all the stress hormonal damage? It's been triggered by unwanted thoughts, what happens when that stops? The effect is to be aligned with the present. By virtue of there being no really tantalizing ideas to pull attention away from just what is. It's not due to just a focus, but rather an allowing. And just noticing what is, from the grossest of sensations to the more subtle. And those are in alignment with the moment. They don't have the hooks of identity. They don't have the hooks of relational thinking to pull attention into a rabbit hole of concepts that form a lens through which the moment is interpreted. Without identification with that lens, there's a perception of the truth being everything but the ideas about it. And to the extent the ideas vie for attention against the moment, they are in some way offering something else than what has been willed in this moment. So there's a like a price to be in resistance in that way. But it's a hidden opportunity cost that disguises itself with a need for security and novelty. And so an outward search is initiated by all of us. It's not that security is bad in and of itself, but the framework of ideas and extrapolations, interpolations that is believed that is necessary to maintain that is cost prohibitive, energetically, vibrationally, because it runs through scenarios, lots of bad scenarios, nostalgic even if they're good, bad, fearful, regretful, all those different types of scenarios potentially. And the parts of the brain that don't know the difference between a thought and a thing, they get triggered. So long as there's an identification with a person to be victimized in some way or to fall prey to misfortune. Just, disaster. That tapestry of ideas that has to be maintained to create a feeling of security. It disturbs so much that the piece that's our neutral gear that we've lost, that piece is it's not remembered from childhood. But in letting go of the feelings that underlie unwanted thoughts and just feeling the feelings, which again have no hooks of identity to grab on and proliferate with other thoughts. Those feelings allow for a spaciousness that is revelatory. It's almost a kind of blasphemy to renounce allegiance to a kingdom of ideas. But regardless of whether or not those ideas are true, they are not the truth to the extent that they are not right now. So it's not to say that those ideas can't point the way to truth. But truth is not a concept. There are concepts that are aligned with truth. There are concepts that are true, but they're ideas. And truth is perceived in full surrender to the moment, just allowing and acknowledging its scope, sovereignty, and perfection. Scope through the senses. Sovereignty in that there is no alternative to reality. All of those are ideas. Alternatives to reality are ideas. So it's the only truth. And perfect. Because everything comes from the first cause, which defines perfection. And so in that lack of a need for improvement, there's no impetus to really extrapolate everything out or interpolate everything in mentally. There's just no there's nothing that's believed to be gained from that eclipses the peace of being in surrender. So it's no longer worth the chase. It's seen to be a means to pull awareness into the moment in the belief that there's something special going on. But whatever novel thing is bringing attention into the moment can only do so for as long as the novelty holds. And then the magic goes away. And then a new thing has to be found. And it's this never-ending quest for more things. But really, the reward is in the moment, not in the thing that brings us into it. And that can be had without something novel to make it happen. It's just kind of unplugging from the conditioning, and the connection is unconscious belief. And it's not like a conceptual belief. Unconscious belief. It's not like a conceptual belief. Unconscious belief is like a different form of that visceral fear. It's like a world is constructed of ideas, and attention lives within that world. And there's investment in all those thoughts, because thoughts are nothing without attention. They need the energy that follows attention to have any kind of existence and awareness. So that world sort of defends itself. And there's a cost of that defense. There's a cost of being out of alignment with the truth, to the extent that an idea is out of alignment with what's going on. It's a little bit of dedication to something other than what is, and there's something lost in that. And it takes a certain kind of ignorance to be in that mode, an identification with something that's not self, but rather is observed by the self. And that linkage isn't broken through a mastery of concepts or an accumulation of concepts and their mastery. It's more of a change in the way things are reacted to, and that can be brought on by a number of things. But something can cause a concentration, and if that concentration is aligned with impersonal data, then there is a sense of stillness, because of there being no need to act on behalf of a constituent that appears in the awareness we are. So it just reveals that the pursuit of things and experiences is really, it's like, those are great, but they can still be enjoyed, of course, but they're not seen to be the source of the joy they bring. That same alignment that would be brought about is already there. So the phenomena can still be enjoyed, but the change in inner arrangement, that temporary change in inner arrangement, is it's understood that that is found in the present, and that's experienced regardless of whether or not circumstances are exceptional or mundane. So there is a diminished drive to control all the variables, because all those contingencies, the mental contingencies, are not being visited in the mental timeline, because attention is just so often left to the present. So for lack of attention, that inner landscape starts to fade, because to survive, thoughts need attention, so they have to be revisited quite a bit, or their memory fades. So there's kind of a loss of interest in the mental real estate so much, because the ends to which those ideas work is an end that's already been seen to not give more than what is available in the present. So there's just no need. So there's a spaciousness from that, and a stillness from the lack of trouble or disturbance within. It's like the heart is like a mirror, and when it's disturbed by all kinds of self-care, then, or self-focus, then it's still, and it's kind of like it reflects the light of the absolute truth, and that is perceived as love in the spiritual heart. But you cease to want to participate in controversies, because concepts are a means to an end. But when concepts are seen to also be the source of an opportunity cost, the enterprise of being free from their power, it can be recognized as a worthwhile endeavor, especially if there's suffering. If those ideas cause suffering, then there's impetus to find relief from them. And so to discover the cause of suffering, because the cause of suffering is ultimately ignorance, and desire is suffering, but ignorance is what predicates the suffering, because there must be identification with a self for there to be desire or fear. So that can be learned just experientially. It can be known conceptually, but yield no change in the peace But if there's impetus to notice the disturbance, that the suffering that's created when ideas are really important, then it's questioned, is it worth it? Is it just a round trip from start to finish in the head with no change in what happens? What's the cost of that? What if all that stopped? So there has to be enough noticing of it to want to discover how to be free from those unwanted thoughts. It's really about energy and how much they get. And that energy comes from attention. And attention is given to things that are important. But if it's important and yet not real, it's a kind of resistance. And it can be in the future, but it can also be on the calendar and not having to be constantly revisited. So just the lack of a need to constantly extrapolate, the ability to put things down that are really just obsessive thoughts that begin and end with themselves and result in no action. It's like, what's the point of that? So it's a sort of an unraveling of conditioning that allows greater alignment with the moment. And then that opportunity cost is discovered of obsessive thinking, which is rooted in the identity.